Salutations Ape Friends, my name is Owen Kirby and today we'll be talking about MIDI sequencing, sample rates, and what's up with the MIDI in chop. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to build a sequencer in Touch involves some kind of timing ramp, in this case an LFO chop set to ramp, going from 0 to 1. Any sort of channel information, a pulse chop is easy to get notes from. In fact, we'll change it to a MIDI sequencer by simply renaming the channel to our MIDI note, channel 1, note 60, and we'll use a lookup to make the sequencing. We'll make sure also to turn off interpolate on the lookup. So there you go, a MIDI sequencer that's sending a bunch of channel 1, note 60, note on and note off messages. And you might think, okay, well, alright, here we go, let's take a null and then audio file in, boom, and then maybe you're thinking about exporting over here, but don't do it. Stop right there. Remember that every time you export to a parameter, everything here only refreshes at your session's sample rate, which is 60 frames per second. All right, let's try seeing what it actually sounds like if we do that. Let's take the sonar, right? So the sonar, pulse it, repeat off. Good advice. Let's go. Also, there's a little fade in, fade out. We probably don't want that, especially if we're doing drums. Okay, what's going on here with my notes? Okay, well, look, we've already established, let's not do this, so let's find another way to play back samples, and I'll start by just showing you a very nice, what I think is one of the best ways to play back one-shot samples in TouchDesigner. Very simple network, so you've got speed chop, constant chop set to audio rate, file in chop, not audio file in, that's what you want, and we're going to be looking it up as well, again with this ramp 0 to 1, interpolate set to off. Let's go. Okay, alright, so this is our sequencer. Like I said, most tutorials will approach it this way, and they make that one mistake. Well, what is it? If you're listening, and if you're thinking, hey, I'd love to have strict hi-hats for a techno track, this is not going to be that. And it's very simple to fix. Here's what's going on. The same issue we had before concerning the pulse parameter of the audio file in only being refreshed every 60 Hertz. The same thing happens with our timing ramp. So we're going to change the resolution of our timing ramp. And before we even listen, maybe you've noticed something happen here. Let's just look at the audio wave files. It's pretty interesting. Here, 60, bam. If you can see this little transient, it looks like it's repeating exactly on the same, like at the same place each repetition. And that's exactly what's happening. So, 480, now it's skittering around. Let's listen to it. Let's crank up the speed. Damn. That's crazy. That's great. That's sequencing in TouchDesigner. It's super tight. There's no problems with it. So what happened? So what happened is that by boosting up the resolution of our LFO timing ramp, we've actually now got a single channel containing 8 samples. Now if I take a trail chop, set it to 8 samples, we'll be able to look at them. Oops, let's see. Oh, that's the timing ramp. Let's not do this. Boom, here we go. So that's our on to off message, and you can see that same with the audio file, within that one frame, it's got 8 samples of resolution on which to trigger our audio file. So this increases the resolution, the timing resolution that's available to us. If I go back to 60, right? These are the 8 samples. Well, something weird's going on here because now it's skittering over 8 samples, but you can see that each sample is getting a note on message. It's because there's 1 sample per frame. So these, you can imagine these are all the other frames. Okay. So, what does this mean? Well, this means that pretty much if you're sequencing up your sample rate, you'll get better timing resolution. If you see that your waveform sort of looks static and repetitive, well, you can also hear it, then you probably haven't done this. Now this brings us to what I think is one of the weirdest bottlenecks of TouchDesigner at the moment, and that's the MIDI in chop. Okay, this is going to be a little bit difficult to explain. It's going to take us a couple of loops. But let's just remember that what we've learned is that we want per frame more samples of resolution. 8 to me is totally fine. So here's our MIDI in, dialog, MIDI device mapper, create new mapping. It's going to be my Arturia Keystep Pro that I brought because it has a built-in arpeggiator. So there we go, channel 49 is already going. We're just going to select that out. Okay, and let's send it over here. Let's take a listen. Already, right, we can see it, the waveform. Not really what we want. Let's crank up. Okay, same problem. So great, we've learned that we should be able to up the resolution, get more samples in our channel, and fix it. Sample rate, sounds great. Let's go. What's up? It's the same thing. Let's see what's going on. Okay, so my sample rate is 480 samples per second, yet I've only got 1 sample. That's strange, and it's a different behavior than older versions. I think starting from version 24 something, there's this new parameter called preserved pulses. And now it's going to take us a little bit into a little bit of a weird case here, because I'm not entirely sure what the preserved pulse parameter is doing, but I know that it has been creating some issues for a certain build, and it's certainly confusing me a little bit. So let's turn it on. Okay, now we've got our 8 samples, but nothing's changed. So let's look at these 8 samples and try to see what's going on. Okay, let's just look here. Okay, so we can see again that the pulses are static, but in this case we're adding a sample of 1, value 1 at index 1, value 0 at index 2, and our actual value of 0.79 at index 3. So prior to the preserve pulse parameter, what I would observe was that I would get 8 samples, but all the samples update at the same time. So we don't actually get any greater resolution. Now, after some back and forth with the nice people of Derivative, I've learned that essentially there's no time stamping going on for the MIDI input. So per frame, it checks what are the new messages, what are the new values, and then it updates that. Okay. So it's possible to miss messages, and I think this is what the preserve pulse parameter is trying to do in the case of the MIDI clock. So if we just look at the MIDI clock, because the MIDI clock is actually sending a bunch of pulses very fast to sync up with other drum machines and stuff, but I don't think it's entirely that helpful in our context. So we can see I'm turning down the clock here, the BPM is like down at 60, you can see all the pulses. I'm not entirely sure what's going on either, but here's our MIDI clock and it's going ham. So in this case, you might have multiple pulses per frame. But if we go back to our Sequencing example, we see that we're not actually concerned with multiple pulses per frame, even if we're going really fast. We're just concerned with getting the pulse at the right index, sample index, within that frame. So, preserve pulse, not only does it need to be on for us to get those 8 samples, but it seems to alter the nature of our MIDI message itself. That would be a note off, right? So one frame would get a note on, note off, and another note on at a different velocity. And I think we can actually hear it in this case. So let's open our ears, nice and bright, and then let's see. So that's okay, let's make it slower. Just listen to the tick. And I'm going to turn preserve pulses off. Right at the top, right at the top. It's, you know, it's very subtle, but you hear it because it's triggering the sound twice. Okay, so what are the solutions then? We've established that, okay, MIDI in, it's not quite working with the sample rate being up. It's only checking out once per frame. So one of the solutions would be to boost up the frames per second over here. Oof. Yeah. But we did just establish that there's an entirely cool, easy workflow that can be done in your standard TouchDesigner session. Boosting up your frame rate, as far as I'm concerned, introduces more problems than are gained for this MIDI input device. So I want to avoid that at all costs. That's essentially the point of this tutorial. It's like how to not just crank up your frame rate to get better resolution. Okay, so what if we had it in a different instance of touch? Actually, yeah, let's do that. But before we do that, you may be asking yourself, what about the MIDI in DAT? That receives all messages. And that's true. However, it only updates the messages per frame. So while it's possible for it to not miss any messages, depending on like the length of your table or whatever, well, it's entirely possible if you try to timestamp these messages, since they all come in at the same frame on receive MIDI. Say we'll do a print abs time.seconds. You'll see that they're all at the same interval because it only prints the timestamp at the beginning of each frame. So nothing's gained here either because we don't have access to that subframe timing information. All right. So MIDI in DAT is no good. Going a bit on a tangent here, but that's the same thing for all the execute DATs. So going back to our VST, jumping ahead a little bit, VST host, let's go. That's my MIDI coming in. Okay. Here's the issue. We got it going wrong from the... So you can hear that it's... The timing is not great on it either. That's because, again, it's only updating once per frame. Same for a sequencer. It needs to go through a chop execute DAT. It'll only execute once per frame. We won't be able to get that sub information. So maybe in the future, it's possible to pipe chops directly into the audio VST. That way, at the very least, we can use this type of sequencing setup to control our VSTs. So that would be good for a number of cases. But of course, many people will want to use hardware devices, their MPCs, their sequencers, plug them into TouchDesigner, or use some VSTs in there, or even just like a keyboard player, especially a keyboard player. They'll want to get all that timing information very accurate. And the promise of a VST chop makes it so that it starts to be a very appealing solution. Anyways, that's jumping ahead. Let's try to find a solution. So bumping up our session. Right, now we've got 480, still only got one sample to preserve pulses, which alters our MIDI in signal is enabled. Oh, okay. See, my frame rate is actually locked at 480, so I would have to change that as well. So, I mean, look, I'm gonna not do this right away because I'm extremely not a fan of this solution. So we're gonna go back to 60, and we're just gonna put this whole thing into another TouchDesigner process. Okay, so here we are. Another small issue I've had is that apparently with the key step, I can't have it set up in the MIDI dialog on both sessions. If I open this one while the other one's on, it won't work. So I've had to reopen my sessions, get this one going, so now it's going. And like we've established, MIDI in on a 60 frames per second session doesn't work for what we need. So we're going to take the MIDI in, we're going to set it up to 480. This is another issue. Preserve pulses back on. We don't like it because it changes it actually just changes the nature of our signals. Right, it's adding these note off effects, and we're sending out via touch out. That's waiting for our next session, so let's open our next session. Now we actually have no MIDI in this section, but we've got touch in. Here's our MIDI information. There are 8 samples coming in. Okay, here we go. So now it's improved because we don't actually have to draw the window. I think there are some issues with if I have to draw the window of the sub-process, then it still goes back to 60 frames, or at the very least I can say like disable VSync. No, it does have to do, seems to have to do with drawing the actual window. Okay, here we go. So let's compare this, I'm gonna underscore it, and here we go. Okay. That's kind of hard to figure out all this stuff. Anyways, here we go. We've got some sort of hi-hat, but let's look at our pulses. And in between there's a little note off. I can actually hear it on the hi-hat. I know what like an 808 hi-hat sounds like. Oof. Okay. So yeah, I guess that's the best we can do at this point. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself for real, but I suppose we could use the MIDI in DAT to send the timing information, get that in, then use that in our setup so that we can avoid using the preserve pulse function. No, okay. Okay, so lastly, my last point, why can't we put this in an engine, or at least this in an engine comp? And I'm not going to bother demonstrating it, but essentially there's no way to address the MIDI device mapper dialog from within an engine comp. So once it's in your engine comp, MIDI doesn't respond. It has no way to know that that you're listening to any sort of device. So that's not working either. Maybe that's something that can be fixed along with the preserve pulse parameter. But that's where we're at. I think the only way through right now is what I just thought of right now, is just getting the timing information, the receiving of timing information, and then figuring out how to use that timing information to delay the signal instead. Yeah, that would be it, I think. But per note. Anyways, and so that's it. So I think that's the weirdest bottleneck of TouchDesigner at the moment. We started by demonstrating that it's entirely possible to have reliable timing within TouchDesigner, to have sample retriggering. In fact, like this little network here, so neat. Let's just listen to it, and so easy to modify the pitch, right? Constant pitch. Let's go. Right, so then if you were using this input, this would all be real time. And sure, the modulation of that slider will be stuck at 60 hertz, but that's much less of a deal breaker than the sequencing. In fact, it's probably totally fine, and you wouldn't notice it most of the time. In conclusion, VST Chop, it raises a lot of hope for the future of TouchDesigner as a be-all, end-all audiovisual dream machine, but it falls short because of the implementation of MIDI in the MIDI in Chop, MIDI in DAT, and I think, you know, on a positive note, if we get this resolved, man, like what an amazing software we're gonna have. It's gonna be incredible. I can, you know, what made me stumble on this to begin with was I just wanted to make a MIDI recording sketchpad that I could easily play back, and then down the line make a video looper, or like loop the MIDI and send it to my real-time synths into my real-time toe. You know, because sometimes it's a lot easier just to play a couple of notes here and there, but then I kept noticing, like, hey, like, I know I'm a pretty bad player, but I'm not that bad, because the timing would just be off all the time. So then I figured this out, and that's where I am today. And a bit of a niche topic, but I wanted to share with you for those who are interested. So thank you for listening, and maybe let's get a conversation going about where you're at in your audio-visual TouchDesigner exploration. What are some bottlenecks that you're hitting, and what would you like to be able to do within this environment that either you are doing right now, or can't do, or dream of, or whatever. So have a nice day and be good.